It's the quarterfinal of the Fide World Cup and tiebreak day in the match between Sam Shankland and Sergey Karjakin. Could Sam the man do it? Could he break down the famed defences of his Russian opponent? Well, this was the first of the 25-minute rapid play games. Shankland had white. He's putting Sergey under pressure here. So Karjakin retreated the knight. Sam took on b4. An exchange of queens, and now queen c5 was a very strong move, hitting that pawn. Karjakin thought he had everything under control with this move, but queen d6 was excellent. Forcing exchange of queens. Knight e6, and this was the move that Karjakin had overlooked. Bishop takes c6, winning a clear pawn. If pawn takes bishop, basically one of these pawns rolls home like this. So Karjakin just had to play b6, and then Shankland was just a pawn up, and very easy just to bring the king over and scoop up these pawns. So Sam Shankland wins the first classical game. The first rapid play game. This was the second rapid play. Well, Karjakin went for it, all guns blazing, and he launched his kingside pawns, and Shankland blundered pretty early, and in this position Karjakin just played b3, trapping that bishop, and that was basically game over. Karjakin won this very smoothly, very convincingly. So 1-1 after the first two rapid games, the first two 25-minute games. So they then went into two 10-minute games, and this is the first of those 10-minute games. Sergey Karjakin with white, Shankland with black. Now, no French defence today. We see Shankland playing his favourite Sicilian, and he goes for the Najdorf. That was the same as the first rapid play game. And Karjakin repeated this idea of h3, launching the g-pawn up the board. Now there are many ways to meet this idea with h3. You can, personally I like to just play the Najdorf move, e5. You can also play e6, you can play g6. But knight c6, so this is the same as the first rapid play game. g4, g6, all exactly the same. Shankland again took on d4. And here Karjakin varied. Very interesting. In the 25-minute game, the second 25-minute game, Karjakin castled and very quickly got a good position, pushing this pawn forward. But Shankland could play here b5. I'm sure that he would have been ready for this. So in this position, very interesting, Karjakin thought for, well, it says here 13 seconds, not a very long thing at all. He'd obviously had time, or maybe one of his seconds had time to think about this position in the meantime. And he played pawn to e5. Now that's a really interesting pawn sacrifice. Well, first of all, I should say that if pawn takes pawn, then this is simply very dangerous. King's in the middle. There's trouble here. There's potential for a bishop to come to b6. If king c7 here, this is absolutely disastrous for black. It's simply too dangerous to go in for this. So Shankland thought for about half a minute and played knight d7. So this wins this pawn. Castle's queenside. Now this is tricky. If knight takes, then f4 wins a piece because of this pin. If pawn takes pawn, then queen b4. This is a nasty pin. So let's say castles, knight d5 hits that e-pawn. There's maybe potential to come into b6 as well. Very unpleasant for black. So Shankland took on e5 with the bishop, hitting the queen. The queen came back. Now, of course, black can just castle out of trouble here. But there is no doubt that white has pretty good compensation here. Those bishops just streaking across the board, making it difficult for black to develop the queenside pieces. In the meantime, white can maybe push forward with e5, with f5 at some moment. The good old h-pawn might appear as well. Or perhaps simply putting the rooks in the middle. This is probably more Karjakin style actually. Rooks in the middle and put some pressure to bear on these pawns. So that was castle's kingside, but Shankland played queen a5, looking to get some counterplay on the queenside straight away. He would very much like to damage those pawns. So knight d5. Now, interesting dilemma here. Do you exchange queens? Or do you take here? Well, if queen takes pawn, then queen b4. So that gives the king an escape square. If castles, then here, and knight e7 check. Bishop d4. I mean, white looks to be doing okay there, but it's always double-edged with this queen down here. Not an easy position. So Shankland exchanged queens. After all, he is a pawn up. But it's difficult. If castles, then knight e7 check. If rook b8, then bishop a7 wins that rook anyway. Of course, knight c7 check is threatened, so that's why king d8 was played. But now the king is in the middle. So Karjakin knows exactly where to attack. In the middle of the board, f4 and bishop g2. I mean, this is beautiful development from white. I think white's pieces just working so well together, all directed towards the center. I think all we can say is it's very easy for white to play this position. Very difficult for black. Well, let me say it. Split rooks. And there is harmony in white's army. Harmony? I can't say it. Harmony in the army. There we go. That's better. I mean, black desperately wants to exchange pieces here. Knight f6. Here, for example, knight c7. I mean, this is just trouble. How does black free his game here? It's so difficult. So Shankland tried a5 to give the rook a little room here. But now bishop f1, that could knock the rook back. But Shankland played rook c6, bishop b5. And you can see the rook is trapped. The funny thing is, white only wants to take that rook on his terms. You don't want to rush at it. So h5 from Shankland, trying to get some counterplay on the king side. Of course, I mean, this would be exactly what black wants, exploiting that pin. So don't take that rook yet. g5, of course, keeping things close. But h4, well, that gives Shankland a little bit of hope. That pawn on h3 is in the sights of the bishop. Very cool move from Karjakin now. He wasn't fussed about this. He simply played his rook over. Yeah, I mean, if this rook is taken here, then, well, that's kind of a dream scenario for black. You've got the two bishops. You've got a nice pawn center. I mean, that's good compensation for the exchange. But no, a very cool move from Karjakin. Rook e1. So he's not concerned that this bishop is pointing at the pawn on h3. Because actually it's difficult to hit that. You need to move the knight out of the way, which Shankland now did. But this is not an easy position. E6 is possible, but then, well, you're not going to get to this pawn for a long time. And here, now it is possible to take that and go knight b6. That's a very different scenario. I mean, black could try this, but white is in control of that position. Let's come back here. So rook e1 has just been played. Knight b8. So Shankland very keen to put some pressure on that pawn. But Karjakin came up with an excellent response here. Bishop a7. Beautiful move, and that just shows the kind of flexibility that white has in the position. You know, there's so much room to maneuver for white. So the knight is hit. Well, if it goes back to d7, then just rook takes pawn. I mean, that's a catastrophe for black. So what does black do here? What do you do with that knight? e6. Now, many good moves here. You could just take this, but Karjakin took on c6. Very interesting decision, actually. So that knight comes back into play, but basically Karjakin realizes that it's very important to have control over this square, and it's extremely difficult for black. The king is still in trouble. King d7. The knight goes back to e3, so there are no problems with that pawn on h3. I mean, it looks so ugly to put the king here, but well, this is so difficult. You could play to e8, but in this situation, well, you can give a check. I wonder about this move as well, knight f6, and there is pressure here. In any case, bishop b6, king d7 played. The knight came back to e3. White is in complete control of this position. Bishop looking so good on b6. Now, knight c4 looks good to hit the d-pawn. Bishop c7 played. Attacking d6. Of course, if the pawn advances, then that can just be taken. Pin and win. So, knight d4 played. With a threat. Sort of a threat. Rook d3, very calm move from Karjakin. I have to say, he looked like he'd really pulled himself together at this moment. Playing very, very coolly. Bishop d7, knight d5 check. Knight f6. Forcing exchange. The knight is attacked. Knight f5 and bishop d6. Well, with this rook completely shut out of play, it is a hopeless situation for black. And now it's just a case of coming in with the rooks, and well, Karjakin's technique was really beautiful actually. Watch this. Here, bishop d8 check. If the king comes up the board, then b3, that traps, it's going to trap the bishop or the king. If bishop here, then well, it's almost mate, but anyway, you've got to give up the bishop and game over. And in the game, bishop d8 check, king here, and a very cool final move. Bishop b6 and rook d8, and mate is following. Superb game from Karjakin. Very, very impressive. Pawn sacrifice with e5. That just gives white a superb initiative. So that was the first 10-minute game. In the second 10-minute game, well, we didn't see any more of the enterprising Karjakin. We saw him revert to his persona of the Minister of Defence, and he clung on and managed to draw a difficult position. So that meant Sam Shankland was knocked out of the Fide World Cup in the quarterfinals. He played a superb tournament and came so close here against a very, very strong opponent. Afterwards, Sam tweeted, "I know now why you cry." the Terminator. That was his tweet. I know now why you cry. Wow. Tough stuff. It's going to hurt, but he played really well. For Karjakin, this is the 4th time that he's made it to the semi-final of the World Cup tournament. I believe that is better than anyone else has achieved. He really is very, very cool in these tiebreak situations. So, well, let's see how he gets on. He's playing against Fide, fellow Russian, who's a dangerous player. I think Karjakin is the clear favourite there, but it's going to be interesting. And in the other semi-final, we have Magnus Carlsen against Jan Krzysztof Duda. An interesting one. Duda is a tough competitor, and Carlsen has already had some adventures against him, so it's going to be interesting. So there we go. Don't forget, like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting us via Patreon or PayPal. Thanks for watching.